Awesome. All right. So Nick, Marcel, and I wanted to bring you up on board because we actually both scheduled separate meetings to chat with you, but we realized, hey, we're talking to him about the same thing in like a 2 hours span. So we thought we'd join it all into one. Um, so the what sparked all this was last week. Sid had a proposal of testing some of our navigation changes about taking the theory of um, us embedding settings links within the left nav, and he's like, there was another thing that was going on with analytics. Last year you created this video about like potentially integrating dashboards um, within the product itself. So under project issues, merge request, there'll be a dashboard link, and he took a stab at creating a proposal, and then we took a look at some of that. But for me personally, that came out of left field, as in like so far I've been like so into settings. I was like, what is this analytics? So I was hoping that you could shed some light on like where the analytics team is at with thinking about embedding or like integrating analytics within the product, and what's changed since that video was made.
So what's changed? First, I'll answer what's changed since that video was made. 2 or 3 product managers. So the potential sort of direction and strategy for how we are implementing analytics has sort of shifted. So that has impacted where we're focusing our attention, and therefore the way that we are thinking about and structuring analytics across GitLab. In that video, I sort of referred to objects. So that was using the model of, if we create these 2 types of objects, one being a report and one being a dashboard, can we somehow standardize and white label these types of pages in a way where they're just reusable, and you don't need to build a new page every time you want to get some data. You just whack it in there, configure some things, and then bada bing, bada boom, you have a page with some data sets in there. That approach of having this sort of universal way of collecting data from an API, and then a universal way of presenting it through reports and dashboards doesn't really fit into the zeitgeist of GitLab, let's say. So that was quite difficult to implement, and I think we've pivoted away from that approach, and we're going with a more we're going with a more iterative approach, which is sort of based on using value stream as the overarching lens of how we order and frame our analytics pages. And with the general idea of the optimized team, we've only got 2 front-end and 2 back-end engineers, and we don't really have too much time or effort to contribute to anything other than DevOps adoption and DevOps adoption and value stream analytics. So the idea is we have some ideas for templates and ways of presenting data in a standardized way at the stage level and at the object level. But from there, we need to rely on basically other teams to create those pages. So for example, like CI/CD analytics, which is like a stage level analytics, is being contributed towards by like the release team and all that sort of stuff, because we can't cover every single piece of analytics in the product. So that makes it a little bit complicated. I'm going on, but what I'm trying to get at is it's complicated because the analytics pages that live across the project and group level and instance level are not consistent, because we just don't have the resource to distribute, to enable and ensure that there's sort of consistency across these levels. that diagram that Marcel's pasted is the one that I'm sort of referring to. But that's basically the current state of analytics at the moment. So it doesn't really fit too nicely within our navigation model, because our navigation model is sort of very object oriented, whereas VSA inherently is a meta analytic, something that overarches lots of stuff. So we have three types of analytics. We have the analytics at the object level, analytics at stage level, and analytics at like the sort of meta level or the executive level, depending on whatever you want to call it. But that's sort of what spurred me on to thinking about how we what would be useful for a navigation for analytics in general. But I'll pause there because I've gone on for a while.
Yeah, no, this was a very, very helpful introduction and very interesting deep dive into how you think about it. When I saw the diagram, one specific question really stood out to me, and we spoke about this a bit async, but I wanted to dive deeper into this. You mentioned that the object analytics are more with the audience of the IC. I'm currently trying to figure out how exactly they fit into the workflow. And as I obviously don't have as much knowledge of their content, how they fit into the typical jobs to be done for these ICs, I would love to hear more about this.
Sure. Let me think. So like broadly speaking, you can have two types of analytics categories within DevOps. You can have one, which is like the looking at analytics data retroactively. So like looking at the past 3 months to understand what's going on. And from looking at the past 3 months, you can start to see different patterns and trends, and that helps you to develop and understand like a more strategic point of view. So you have this historical view, which is more around the strategic side of things. And then there's the work in progress, what's currently going on, what is currently in flight sort of analytics view, which is much more around like the tactical side of things. So if you look at the issues analytics and the MR analytics right there, they're both displaying data around what is currently in flight with regards to MR analytics, or what is currently in flight with regards to issues. And from there, providing some data points to help you identify outliers so you can then jump on top of it. So I'd say like it sort of applies to ICs in larger companies, but you can also see it working for like dev leads or engineering managers, those sorts of people who are sort of working directly with a team, and not so much for director level who want to see sort of the general trends for how multiple teams are performing side by side.
Got it. That's very interesting. But it sounds to me like the audience is more on the lead manager side versus the IC side. Is that correct?
Yeah, it tends to go that way. And then the higher up you go, the more abstract it becomes, and that's where the higher up you go in terms of like director or exec or whatever it is.
That makes complete sense. And I think this is a very interesting piece of information, because we are really trying to figure out how this idea of moving analytics into the left sidebar, into each contextual menu, could really work. And one very important piece to think about there is really, who are we addressing? And if that's really the focus of the IC, then it absolutely should belong into the contextual menu. If it's really more leads managers who probably also need the connection between issue and MR, I'm still wondering if overloading the contextual menu is going to pay off in the end, or if we are polluting the left sidebar by adding more menu items in there, even if it's mostly focused on leads and managers. So that's just to give you some background on why we're asking these specific questions.
Sure. And then to add a little bit more nuance to it as well, like this is the current state snapshot of how ICs and dev leads are currently using analytics. However, I'd say most of the industry aren't really using analytics and data all that effectively to inform the workflows. So one could imagine as the industry becomes more mature and GitLab becomes more mature with its offerings, more and more people will want to be using analytics in the future, just not in the current state, especially if we start implementing more sort of value stream thinking into the work that we're doing in order to like streamline and boost productivity.
Thanks for
So it's not
clarifying that.
It's not fixed. Yeah, it's not fixed. I imagine it's going to evolve.
Yeah, I can see how you kind of framed it around the IC kind of angle with issues and merge requests, because this is actually the first time I actually looked at analytics on myself. And I see it as like, oh, this is actually kind of cool from you know, like I'm tracking my performance and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I have a lot of issues that are like almost a year old, and so that's like, oh, okay, you know, what's wrong with that? And you could be using that in a coaching perspective or like optimizing my own workflow kind of thing. So yeah, really interesting, and I think that's kind of the case where it is what it is now, but like it could be so much more, but like where that path is kind of like to be determined, you know, like you said, like, okay,
and
cool.
And just to add a little bit more, the reason I said sort of like dev leads and ICs is because all these analytics pages are facilitating team collaboration in some way or another. So even if an engineering manager is looking at a bunch of issues which is within his team or her team, then they still want to collaborate with, like, they want to drill into the individual issues from those individual contributors and collaborate with them around that in some way or another. So it's sort of a touch point for teams to work around, but I'd say the emphasis is on dev leads or the to start out with.
Maybe it would help to, but go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just going to say you can move on to your next point, considering the time, but yeah, you have the floor, Marcel.
Because I thought it might be a bit helpful to also give you, Nick, a bit of an introduction into why we have made certain changes and our long-term philosophy, to then really start discussing how could this maybe fit into some of the long-term proposals. So I'm going to share my screen. And up to 14.0, we have really been working on consolidating, making things easier to overview, making things more predictable. And when you look at especially this great comparison that Michael created, this was our current version. You have the entire left sidebar and so much stuff is hidden, even when you have just a small portion open, like issues where there are just 6 menu items here. And things like settings are constantly hidden behind something unless you have a really large screen. So we worked hard on getting this down to a smaller, manageable number. That exposes all the options all the time, because it's such a big improvement of just seeing the menu items you have available to yourself.
Amen.
Second, the different group options here, projects, groups, more, all consolidating into one menu. Also under the long-term thinking of having one path to go everywhere. And what we are now considering as some kind of larger breakup of the current structure are ideas, for example, around lifecycle buckets. Our assumption is that we have a large number of personas that work with very specific parts of our entire platform. And if we use a pattern that, for example, Firebase is using, where they group the different features into specific buckets that are aligned to the lifecycle they offer: build, release and monitor, analytics, engage. You can see it's very, very similar to how we think about our lifecycle. You can group the different options you make available to the user in a more limited kind of way that's more focused on where they work and what they think about, so that you have all the options that this person would usually work together with directly available, but still have all the other options in reach, which would be amazing for us, because right now we oftentimes have this problem where teams work around this problem of exposing too many items on the left sidebar by hiding them. If we look at our most popular open source projects, like, you can see they have disabled a large ton of menu items here. We don't know for sure whether this is just for external users or whether this is also disabled for internal team members. But it's a problem that we take away the opportunity for each team member to explore these areas just because one person decides that they shouldn't see this. So this is one of the reasons why we are thinking about these lifecycle buckets, and to make it easier to overlook and to make it easier to really see everything this person would want to consider as part of the workflow. A second proposal that we are currently looking at is a very, very crazy idea. We started playing around with this a couple of days ago, where we used the same pattern that coincidentally also Firebase uses, where they push the menu items we would have in the submenu on the left sidebar as tabs onto the page. So you still have only authentication, but then sign-in method, templates, and similar to analytics, usage. If we would take over the same kind of approach, we would have the example of repository, where before you have these 8 items in the left sidebar, and instead expose them on the content itself. You can see directly the upside that it doesn't expose all of them on the left sidebar anymore, but also the downside that we create more complexity on the content page, that we push the actual content further down, and that we, at this point, also are thinking about moving the breadcrumbs, for example, into this area, but it's all kind of related. If we combine these two long-term ideas we already have, we could even look at what would happen if we go to these lifecycle buckets and then also work with the tabs on pages. That's something that Catherine also has here as another proposal, where you would see that previously, if we looked at like the build lifecycle bucket, it would have 10 items, which is a large number. And we could go down to something like 5 with repository, merge requests, CI/CD, registries, snippets. So these are currently 2 large ideas we are considering, and they are not yet tested, not yet validated. They are still in the very early stage of basically everything. But Christy mentioned that you were supporting on a product vision, a storyboard, and especially also looking around how do teams and how do people move from one stage to another. And that's why I really wanted to hear your input, to hear your thoughts, how you're thinking around that part of the product vision aligns with these ideas, and if there's anything that already stands out.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I've been working with Christy, Anoop, and Scott, and the general idea is creating a 3-year vision for our R&D teams to show how all the different stages within GitLab sort of fit together and create this coherent experience, to help sort of inspire people into thinking a little bit more cross-team, cross-user flow, all that sort of thing. So yeah, navigation obviously has a large part to play in that, because up until this point, navigation has very much like siloed the way that we think about GitLab. So I can definitely sort of see a future vision for navigation aligned with this quite nicely. With regards to like the progress that's been made on it so far, like I'm gonna start. We've got like a rough storyboard of what we want to work on so far, just like the general beats within the story of who's going to be doing what. And then I think this week I'm going to start to visualize some stuff out and make some details so I can include you in the process there. But just like a word of warning, the stuff that the fidelity at which they want me to design is going to be like moderate. So it's going to be those purple sort of squiggly wireframe things, because we want people focusing on the concepts more than the actual like designs themselves. And we don't want people looking at my designs either. So that's probably a bonus. Yeah, so I suppose with regards to this, it makes sense. Like the one thing that I've always struggled with this sort of stuff, with trying to organize and like reconcile the different features within GitLab stages is like the clusters and the stuff that you've outlined there definitely makes sense. But then there's also like the way that marketing describes the different DevOps stages and stuff as well. So there's always the potential for confusion in that area where you're just like, well, how come the DevOps stages in marketing says blah, 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 and these ones are like build and plan and all that sort of stuff. So finding the right balance between the way that we present ourselves and market ourselves as a product with the different value stream stages and the things that are available to us within the product is always has the potential for being a little bit confusing. But I think that's potentially holding ourselves to a very high standard considering where we are now. We don't really even talk about the DevOps stages all that much within the product. So that was the first thing that jumped out to me there. What you showed makes sense. With regards to the tab vision, it instantly made me feel like, oh, I don't know about that, because I use tabs quite a bit within analytics pages. So having tabs within tabs and nested and all this sort of stuff makes me a little bit hesitant to sort of introduce that potential complexity. But apart from that, yeah, happy to sort of collaborate with you around how that will fit into the vision. The general idea of the story is going to be starting out with some sort of high level initiative or idea within the video games industry and showing how work then gets done throughout the entirety of GitLab and the value stream, to take that idea and initiative from an OKR all the way into deployment and measuring the results of that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I 100% agree with you on the potential confusion between the marketing stages and our own stages, because I don't even know whether it would be a good idea to propose something like create and plan. Could be confusing to users just because we have aligned in this way. And then if we don't do it, yeah, I can absolutely see that point. A few things out, or just one thing actually I would like to make sure we end with, looking at next steps besides the area around the storyboard. For analytics, we currently have a lot of design assumptions, and we are currently looking at our own information architecture. One piece that to me still is missing and that I would love to get some data for is basically the same as the settings. When we are talking about the goal of each analytics page, have a user show us how they would navigate inside the product to get to that space. Have we ever done something like this before?
Didn't a lot of the navigation research that Catherine do sort of look at that sort of thing?
It looked,
although it felt to me a little bit flawed based on the fact that probably asking users to navigate to pages that they'd never navigate to anyway. So I think, yeah, like I haven't conducted any research around the IA or the navigation, but some of the stuff that Catherine did may have touched upon that.
Yeah, it did on the settings side. So for example, where would you go to change the, I think it was the protected branch for the merge request area. And what I would now love to have as understanding is, if we move analytics to these contextual settings, does that not only make sense for users from a pure like IA perspective, but is that also where they would navigate to, or would they actually continue moving to analytics? And that's where I would love to get more data and insights. I don't know how you feel about this.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, understanding the user mental model for analytics structure as opposed to our sort of just general IA. Yeah, it makes sense. I don't know whether I'd be able to lead that at all. I'm going to be doing currently I'm standing in for Larissa, who's out. So I haven't got much time for design at the moment. Yeah, like I'd be happy to help shape the research plan and provide some input, but I don't know whether I'd be able to like lead that at all.
No worries. I know Catherine is currently on vacation, well deserved. So maybe Michael, you and I could talk about the general idea tomorrow in our one-on-one, and then we check with Catherine and come back to you, Nick, next week when Catherine is back.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
That
Awesome.
sounds like a great plan, because we're probably testing this structure versus some other structures of our nav. I think there's a difference between tree testing and like navigation testing with the UI. So I think if we can set up a few scenarios that are constant across the three, like from the tree test to this one, to this idea, to your tabs, then we can probably do some analysis on that to see what we can get out of that. So yeah, let's discuss that in detail tomorrow, Marcel.
Yeah, and this is also where it's going to be super interesting to see the actual IC versus lead manager view, and also get some understanding about that area.
Yeah, agreed. I think having the extra data of whether or not it's an engineer versus a manager is going to be really useful.
Yep, perfect. Sounds like we have our next steps lined up. Anything else one of you two wants to mention or discuss?
All good?
I'm all good for now.
Perfect. Then thank you two for setting this up, and looking forward to our future collaboration here.
Awesome.
Cool.
Right,
Cheers.
have a great day.
Appreciate
everyone.
it, guys. Have a
Bye.
good one.